Hi, everyone. Today's video is on slavery, morality, and the Constitutional Convention. And this is an addendum to the AP Government Section 1.5 on the ratification of the Constitution. And while I did this is while preparing and watching the AP videos that come from the AP people, they mentioned that the word slavery was never used in the Constitution because there was discomfort with it. I agree with that. But she goes on to further explain, and my quote here, is that slavery was not discussed as whether it was a moral issue or should it continue at the Constitutional Convention. And I disagree with that. And why I disagree with that is because we have evidence to the contrary. James Madison took copious notes of the Constitutional Convention, and he detailed day by day what they talked about at the convention, who spoke, what they spoke about. And when you read his notes, you know that whether slavery was moral and how it should continue, or whether it should continue, was discussed and discussed many times at the Constitutional Convention. So I'm just going to give you a brief rundown of how. So the first full month of the Constitutional Convention was in June. It started in May once everyone got there. And James Madison, we know, is the one who took the most notes at the convention. It was very important to him. Madison himself is a bit of a tricky paradox to understand when it comes to slavery. Yes, he himself did have slaves. He felt more responsible for keeping them once he got the property that belonged to his parents. He himself realized that slavery was not a good thing. And before he took such a big prominent role in our government, he actually looked to move to New York because he did not want to live in a slave economy. He wanted to get by without owning slaves. So you knew that this was something that really conflicted him. And at the beginning, right, in June, Madison is already saying in the convention that the greatest divide in American politics is having or not having slaves. It was not about the large states and small states and the great compromise. The biggest issue, he thought, really concerning politics was about slavery. And you see foreshadows of the Civil War already at the Constitutional Convention. Well, this continues. On Wednesday, July 11th, they were discussing the Three-Fifths Compromise, and that became a big debate. And eventually it was defeated to strike out the three-fifths part for all. Now, Gouverneur Morris, pictured here, is a very fascinating character to learn about when it comes to our revolution and the Constitutional Convention. He's from Pennsylvania. And he said on this day that he could never agree to give such encouragement to the slave trade. So right along, that is an issue of morality. Is the slave trade right or wrong? I don't want to encourage this. All right, so morality is continuing to be discussed. Now let's look at the next month. And I want to actually say, later in July, on the 13th, Morris and Butler of South Carolina had a really pointed exchange over slavery. And so it's something that they got into. Then on August 8th, Gouverneur Morris said, slavery was a nefarious institution. So people are calling out slavery, right? They know it is morally wrong. Now, August 21st, we have George Mason, another tricky figure. George Mason does own slaves. He does not free his slaves upon his death, like, say, Washington does. Now, he's from Virginia, and in his will, he actually left 36 slaves to his children. He was one of Virginia's largest slaveholders at one point, yet he wrote a lot about why it's wrong. In fact, before the Revolution in 1773, George Mason wrote that slavery tramples upon the rights of human nature. Now, he eventually doesn't support the Constitution because it doesn't have a Bill of Rights. So this idea of natural rights is just an important thing to Mason. And even though he was from Virginia, even though he was some slaveholder, on the 21st of the convention, he wrote that slavery is inconsistent with the principles of the Revolution. Now, you would think that people from the North then would all be against it. Well, some sort of looked still into whether or not states should make that determination. One example is Oliver Ellsworth of Connecticut. And he himself didn't have slaves, but he thought because didn't have slaves, he really couldn't judge the issue. And he said morality or wisdom of slavery are the considerations belonging to the states thereof. So maybe there is morality issues to discuss here, but let's let the states have these discussions instead, sort of punting the ball down a little bit. Just the next day, we have Charles Pinckney, also of South Carolina, former revolutionary officer. Many of these men fought and led in the revolution. He did own many slaves. He did own many plantations. In 1790, he had about 111 slaves himself. He was a big proponent of slavery as a positive good. He thought it benefited not just slaveholders, but the slaves themselves. And his statement on the 22nd was, if slavery be wrong, it is justified by the example of all the world. In other words, all the other kids are doing it, can't be wrong, right? Other countries, Spain's doing it, Portugal, England, you're going to say they're all morally wrong, right? So once again, whether it is right or wrong, the morality of slavery is being discussed at the Constitutional Convention. But it does not end here. John Dickinson of Delaware, he at one point owned 37 slaves. He believed it was wrong. Even though he wasn't born a Quaker, he started to connect more with the Quaker message and its ideology. And Quakers are big proponents against slavery. And by 1786, he freed all of his slaves. He initially said, well, I'm going to free them once they serve so many years. Then he was like, no. But 1786, before this convention, I'm getting rid of all of them, or freeing all of them. I shouldn't say get rid of, because he actually permitted, hey, if they want to continue to work here, they can. They'll get paid if they want to live here. He tried to accommodate, knowing that just freeing slaves wouldn't just solve all the issues. But anyway, on that same day, he said, importing slaves is inadmissible on every principle of honor and safety, knowing it is, if it's dishonorable, it's immoral, right? Then we have Randolph said, listen, we can't agree to this here. Let's refer this whole issue with slavery to a committee. And by August 24th, there's the Committee on the Slave Trade. And they had a bunch of different things to discuss. Like, first, let's prohibit it until 1800, and then we'll deal with it. All right, how about the next thing? They said, let's push it back to 1808. We'll prohibit the slave trade until 1808. Well, Madison knew that a lot could happen in 20 years, and a lot did happen in 20 years. Madison said that he thought it was wrong to admit into the Constitution that the idea that there could be property in men. He's like, if we're going to say we're going, like, just talking about this, making plans for this, shows how wrong it is. We mentioned the discomfort in the use of the word slave, right? Because we don't even want to admit that. But yet, even when you use different words, he knew if you're talking about when you're going to have no more slave being sold into the United States, or the Fugitive Slave Act, this itself is wrong. So Tuesday, August 28th, we have Butler once again. Now, he was one of the largest slave holders in all of the United States. He had many plantations, and by 1822, he had over 1,000 slaves. And Pinckney, right? They basically said, you need to have this clause about the fugitive slave clause. All right. Why was this an issue? Well, at this Constitutional Convention, you already had states that already did not have slaves. They already banned it. Massachusetts. So that would be a common goal for many runaway slaves to get to. Pinckney called them criminals. And what happens is another compromise. Slavery protects the economic interests of the South. So in turn for the fugitive slave law clause, the law comes later, you're basically getting the protection of economic interest to the North. They did worry about the language. So when it was originally, they legally held to service or labor in one state that they'd have to, be returned. They changed it to held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, meaning some states are going to have laws for slaves, but some states, know better, right? Was the idea of why they wanted to add that, and will not have it. That also shows the significance of states' rights. Roger Sherman of Connecticut, we talk about him with the Great Compromise. He saw that this was just wrong to include because he saw no more propriety in the public seizing and surrendering a slave or servant than a horse. So we know how that, we'll learn in history how the Fugitive Slave Clause gets legislated and then becomes laws and all those sorts of things. Now, I don't think I mentioned, but I should mention that there was a point where the South said, listen, if you don't include certain things here, we're gonna walk out. If you don't give us slavery protection. And that was the end of August 22nd. Rutledge said North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia won't sign the Constitution without certain slavery protections. So did the people who think that slavery was morally wrong really have a chance? How morally wrong would it also be to just not let the Constitution go and fall into Articles of Confederation? There was the common idea that slavery was on its way out. Of course, Madison's prediction is right. Things can happen in 20 years, like the cotton gin. But was that enough? Did they uphold the moral principles or not? That's for you to decide. But to say that it was not discussed at all, that's incorrect, right? Back then, there were many who still knew that slavery was a moral wrong. So, what do you think? We'll discuss.